My name is Michael Green, and I suppose I should start this story with a confession. Age softens a man, but it also sharpens his memory. And sometimes those memories return with a kind of gentle sting, especially when they involve the people you love. When I think back to the Christmas that changed everything between me and my son, I still feel a quiet ache. Not anger. No, that part has long faded, but a kind of tender sadness mixed with a lesson I waited too many years to teach. It was the year my son, Daniel, came home with his new wife, Emily. They had been married only a few months, full of energy, confidence, modern opinions, and ideas they believed the whole world should follow. I was happy for them. Proud, even. Daniel had grown into a successful man, working in tech, traveling often, always moving fast. Maybe too fast. That year, as December rolled in, I decorated the house the way I always did. Nothing fancy, just simple Christmas pieces that had been in the family for decades. A wooden nativity set my father carved with his own hands. Old red stockings my mother stitched before she passed. A string of lights that flickered if you touched the wrong bulb but still shined beautifully in the evenings. Traditions. Quiet, simple traditions. But to Daniel, they were outdated. I remember the moment he said it. He walked into the living room, saw the decorations, and let out a soft laugh. Not cruel but careless. The kind of laugh young people give when they think they've outgrown something. "Dad," he said, shaking his head, "you really still put all this up? These decorations are ancient. You should get modern stuff, smart lights, synchronized music. Something that actually fits the times." I smiled that day, though it wasn't easy. "These fit my times," I told him. "And that's enough for me." He didn't mean harm, I know that now. But back then, the words stung. He said them in front of Emily too, and she giggled softly, covering her mouth like she realized too late that she shouldn't have laughed. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my traditions. I've learned through life that when someone mocks something you cherish, silence is often the better shield. But a quiet seed was planted inside me that day. Not revenge in the loud sense, no. More like a desire to teach him something he had forgotten. Something I had forgotten to pass on. That year was also my first Christmas without my wife, Linda. She used to be the bridge between me and Daniel, guiding us both with her gentle humor and her warm presence. After she passed, our home felt half empty, even when people filled it. Maybe that's why I was so protective of the old decorations. They were pieces of her, and pieces of the life we built together. I think Daniel forgot that part. Or maybe he never realized it. But life has a way of reminding people of what they overlook. The evening before Christmas Eve, Daniel and Emily arrived with bright smiles and shiny gift bags. Their car was packed with the latest gadgets they planned to show me, gift me, or subtly encourage me to use. Smart speakers, digital photo frames, all the things they believed I needed. I thanked them warmly. I never wanted them to think I wasn't grateful. But I had only one gift prepared for Daniel. A simple box wrapped in deep green paper, tied with a faded ribbon I had saved for years. It sat quietly under the tree, small and easy to overlook. When Daniel saw it, he smirked. "That looks like something from the 90s. "Earlier," I replied with a soft chuckle. "Much earlier." He laughed. Emily laughed. It was all light-hearted, but their amusement settled somewhere deep inside me. Not bitterness, just understanding. Understanding that my son had moved so fast in life, he had lost sight of the slow, meaningful things. But I didn't say anything. I simply waited. Christmas Day was always slow in our home. Morning coffee, quiet music, the soft glow of the tree lights. I made breakfast the way Linda used to, cinnamon pancakes, scrambled eggs, and warm apple compote. Emily loved it. She said it tasted comforting. Daniel liked it too, though he joked it wasn't health-conscious. I let him joke. Let him talk. Let him feel certain that the world he built was the only one that made sense. Because sometimes a person must walk confidently into a belief before life gives them the moment that humbles them. And that moment came when he opened his last gift. But before I take you there, you need to know a few things about Daniel.
About me.
About how distance grows not just from absence, but from misunderstanding, and how quiet revenge is not about punishment, but revelation. When Daniel was young, Christmas was sacred in our home. Every year, I'd take him to the small forest behind our town. We would walk through the snow, searching for the perfect branch to cut and place above our fireplace. It wasn't a real tree, just a branch, simple and humble. But Linda loved the shape of it, especially the imperfect curves. She always said, "Beauty is in the stories, not the perfection." We kept that tradition alive until Daniel turned 14. That year, he told us he was too old for childish things. He refused to come with me. He said he had plans with friends. So I went alone. And something changed after that. Traditions die quietly, not with a shout, but with a shrug. Now, decades later, he mocked the same traditions he once held with eager little hands. And that, I think, is what hurt the most. Not the mockery, but the forgetting. So I crafted my revenge the way a patient man does, with thought, with memory, and with the soft hope that maybe, just maybe, he would understand. The gift I prepared for him wasn't expensive. It wasn't modern. It had nothing to do with technology, success, or the world he'd grown accustomed to. It was the opposite. It was something old. Something starting to crumble. Something holding more value than anything money could ever buy. But he wouldn't know that until he opened it. And before he did, I wanted him, no, I needed him, to walk through the same emotional doorway he once closed. All quiet revenge begins with patience. The morning stretched slowly, as it always did on Christmas Day. Snow had fallen overnight, coating the neighborhood in quiet white, and the town felt softer, calmer, as if the world itself had pressed pause. Daniel and Emily moved around the house with the kind of energy only young couples have, comparing gifts, showing off new gadgets, and making plans for the afternoon. I watched them from the kitchen doorway as I poured my second cup of coffee. I let them talk, laugh, and tease. I didn't intervene. I had learned long ago that trying to argue with someone who believes they are already right is pointless. The lesson I intended to teach Daniel would come in its own time. And I had no doubt it would. Throughout breakfast, Daniel continued to make subtle remarks about the decorations. "I mean, Dad, this garland looks like it belongs in a museum," he said, picking up a frayed ribbon. "Why don't we get something sleek, modern? Instagram-worthy?" Emily giggled beside him, a soft, indulgent laugh that made it clear she found his teasing charming. "Dad's just old-fashioned," she said. "You know that's part of his charm." I smiled quietly. "Perhaps," I said. No more words. After breakfast, Daniel suggested we take a walk around the neighborhood. He wanted to show Emily the new Christmas display down the street, houses lit with synchronized lights and enormous inflatable characters. I agreed, not because I was interested, but because it gave me the chance to observe him. Walking alongside him, I noticed the subtle arrogance in the way he carried himself, the same arrogance that had once made him a bright, ambitious child but now made him careless with words. He talked about his achievements at work, his investments, and his plans for the new year. He bragged without humility, unaware of how much the world had yet to teach him. I listened. Patiently. By the time we returned, the house was buzzing with the sounds of Emily opening gifts. I could see Daniel's impatience growing. He was clearly looking for something big, something flashy, something that proved his modern world was superior to my old one. And then he saw my gift. It was placed carefully under the tree, almost in the shadows, wrapped in the green paper and faded ribbon. He picked it up casually, turning it over in his hands. "Oh, this must be from Mom, right?" he said, not looking at me. "No," I said. My voice was calm, almost soft. "From me." He raised an eyebrow, and a small teasing smile appeared. "Really? What is it? An antique? Something from the 80s. I said nothing. I simply sat back and watched him struggle with the box as if it were heavier than it looked. That small hesitation was my first reward. The pause before a young man, confident in his superiority, discovers that life is rarely as predictable as he thinks. He tore at the wrapping, his curiosity mixing with amusement. The box opened to reveal its contents, a small, handcrafted wooden ornament, carved in the shape of a little tree. Its edges were rough, the paint faded with age. He held it up, inspecting it closely. "A tree," he said, trying not to sound unimpressed. "Do you remember?" I asked quietly, letting the silence stretch just long enough for him to realize I wasn't joking.
Daniel frowned. "Remember what?"
I smiled faintly, leaning forward.
"The tradition.
When you were little, we used to go into the forest to find the perfect branch for the house. You picked the one with the crooked edge, the one I didn't want at first, but you insisted.
Linda loved it." The moment hung between us.
Daniel's brow furrowed, and for the first time that morning, his confident mask began to crack. I don't know," he said slowly. "That was a long time ago. I was just a kid."
I nodded. "Yes."
"And yet, here you are, laughing at the same traditions you once held dear. You've forgotten the patience it takes to cherish small things. The meaning behind them. The people who made them special." He looked down at the ornament, then around the room at the garland, the stockings, the simple wooden decorations. A flash of something I hadn't seen in years passed over his face, recognition, and maybe a small, painful regret. But he still didn't fully understand.
Not yet.
Over the next hour, more gifts were opened, and the house filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Daniel grew quieter, but not from humility, he was simply processing. He didn't speak much about the ornament, though he kept it in his hand, turning it over again and again. Finally, Emily looked at him, sensing the change.
"Daniel, are you okay?" she asked.
He didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at the ornament, then at me, and finally, something in his expression shifted. The confidence, the teasing, the modern world arrogance. It all faded, replaced by a stillness that made the room feel colder, quieter, but in a meaningful way. I realized then that he was beginning to understand.
Slowly.
That afternoon, he suggested we take a drive.
I agreed.
The town was full of lights, music, and people celebrating, but Daniel was silent. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was contemplative. I could feel him wrestling with his thoughts. The realization that traditions weren't outdated, that the past had value, that he had mocked something sacred without understanding it. I watched him as he drove. Occasionally, he glanced at the ornament still in his lap. I knew what he was thinking, though he didn't voice it. He had missed something, something he couldn't buy, replicate, or modernize. By the time we returned home, the sun had set, casting a soft glow through the windows. Daniel placed the ornament carefully on the mantel, almost reverently. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, and I knew the lesson was starting to take root. "Dad," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual, I didn't realize. I forgot how important this all was." I nodded slowly, smiling. Sometimes, we forget what matters most until we stop moving too fast to notice. Emily looked at me, confused, but I could see her beginning to understand as well. The quiet wisdom in my eyes, the calm patience of a man who has seen enough of life to know that lessons are better learned softly rather than shouted, spoke louder than any words I could offer. That evening, Daniel asked if I would tell him more about our old Christmas traditions. He wanted to understand the stories behind each decoration, the memories tied to every ornament, the meaning of every ribbon, every faded string of lights.
And I did.
I told him stories of Linda and me, of our first Christmas together, of the small joys we had collected like treasures. I told him about the Christmases when he was little, how he had insisted on the crooked branch, how proud he made us feel. I told him about the lessons those simple traditions taught. Not just about Christmas, but about patience, love, and the value of memory. By the time I finished, Daniel was quiet, reflective.
Not defensive. Not arrogant. Just still. Listening. Learning.
And that, I realized, was the point of my quiet revenge.
Not humiliation. Not punishment.
Not proving who was right or wrong.
It was understanding. Insight.
A moral correction without cruelty. The seed had been planted. The young man who had mocked the old ways was beginning to see the truth of them. And that truth, quietly revealed, carried a weight far greater than any words of rebuke or anger could have conveyed. The days after Christmas passed in a gentle, almost imperceptible shift. Daniel didn't mention the ornament again, at least not directly. But I could see the change in his manner, slower to tease, more reflective in his speech, more attentive to the small details around the house. It was subtle, but it was unmistakable. I had learned a long time ago that the most effective lessons rarely arrive with fanfare. They are quiet, like water shaping stone, patient and inevitable. And this one, I knew, was just beginning. On New Year's Eve, Daniel suggested we all go out for dinner. Emily had other plans, but he asked if I would join him. I agreed, not knowing fully why I felt compelled. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the hope that he might finally recognize the value of things long overlooked. As we drove through the city streets, decked in lights and crowded with celebrants, Daniel's usual chatter returned. He talked about work, about friends, about his ambitions. But there was a softness in his tone that hadn't been there before. Not humility exactly, but a willingness to listen, to pause, to notice. After dinner, as we walked back to the car, he fell silent. The night was cold, crisp, and quiet except for the distant sounds of celebration. I could feel him searching for something in the silence, though he didn't know exactly what. Finally, he spoke. "Dad, I've been thinking about the ornament," he said, hesitating as if unsure how to continue.
I didn't realize.
I laughed at it, but now I can see what it means.
The stories. The memories.
The love that went into it.
I nodded.
Sometimes we only see value in what is loud, flashy, or new. But the quiet, patient things, the things that endure, often carry more weight than we understand at first. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. I think I've been missing a lot. I've been moving so fast, chasing the next thing, the next achievement. I forgot what matters most. And there it was, the opening I had been waiting for.
Not arrogance. Not resistance.
But recognition.
The seed of understanding.
The realization that life isn't just about speed or success. It's about memory.
Connection. Patience.
The next morning, Daniel asked if I would show him the old nativity set. I agreed, and we spent hours unpacking it, placing each figure carefully, discussing the story behind it, and the stories of the past. He listened intently, asking questions I had never expected him to ask. Questions that revealed curiosity, reflection, and a desire to understand. It was during this time that the quiet moral revenge I had orchestrated fully revealed itself. Not as punishment, not as humiliation, but as a lesson learned through personal reflection and experience. I handed him the final piece of the nativity set, a small wooden angel that had belonged to Linda. It was faded, its wings slightly chipped, but it held a significance no modern ornament could match. "This," I said softly, "is the piece that reminds us why we celebrate. It's not the lights, not the gifts, not even the traditions themselves. It's the meaning we place on them. The memories we keep alive. The people we honor." Daniel held the angel in his hands, turning it slowly, examining it with the care of someone suddenly realizing that beauty is not always in perfection, but in intent and love. He looked at me, and for the first time in many years, I saw him not as my son, or as the man who mocked my traditions, but as someone learning a profound truth. I understand now," he said quietly, almost a whisper. "I never realized. I never appreciated. I'm sorry, Dad. I should never have mocked these traditions. Not your memories.
Not Mom's. Not anything."
I smiled, not because I wanted to punish him, but because he had finally seen the lesson I intended all along.
"It's all right, Daniel.
You needed to see it for yourself. That's how these things stick. Not by me telling you, but by you feeling it, understanding it, and realizing its importance in your own way. That was the turning point, the moment where subtle patience became moral victory. Where quiet observation, memory, and timing taught a lesson far more powerful than anger ever could. Daniel didn't just apologize.
He began to change.
He stopped rushing through life with the arrogance of certainty. He paused to notice, to listen, to appreciate the small things. And though he never admitted it directly, I could see it in the way he handled Emily, in the way he engaged with friends, and in the quiet attention he began to give to the home he had once dismissed. The final piece of my quiet revenge was not a dramatic confrontation. It was the revelation that he had overlooked what truly mattered, and that he now understood it, without coercion or shame. Revenge, I realized, is often not about making someone suffer. True revenge, the kind that leaves no bitterness, is about orchestrating a moment where they recognize the error of their ways on their own. It is about patience, timing, and insight. And as I watched Daniel place the angel gently on the mantle, I felt a deep, satisfying peace. Not because I had proved anything, but because he had learned what I had hoped he would. Because the past had returned, not as a punishment, but as wisdom. Because love, memory, and patience had triumphed over mockery and carelessness. The days that followed were calm, almost serene. Daniel no longer mocked the old traditions. Instead, he asked questions, sought stories, and participated in rituals he had once dismissed. I watched him quietly, savoring the subtle transformation, the way a patient gardener observes the first blooms of spring after a long winter. On New Year's morning, he came into the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee. His eyes were warmer, softer, and there was a humility in his posture I hadn't seen before. "Dad," he said, "thank you for the gift. For everything this Christmas. I didn't realize how much these things meant. I didn't realize how much they mattered to me." I accepted the cup, smiling gently. It wasn't just about the gift, Daniel. It was about remembering. About honoring what's been handed down. About seeing value in what lasts quietly rather than what shines briefly. He nodded, staring at the cup as if he could see more than just coffee in it. "I get it now. I really do." That afternoon, we took a walk through the old neighborhood. I pointed out the houses that still kept traditions alive, the families that quietly celebrated the small, meaningful moments. Daniel listened. Not to respond, not to argue, but to understand. And for the first time, I saw him absorbing lessons beyond the superficial. When we returned home, he went straight to the tree. He carefully lifted the wooden ornament, the crooked little tree I had given him, and held it in his hands for a long time. Emily joined him, and I could see her curiosity growing. "What's so special about it?" she asked gently. Daniel smiled, almost to himself. "It's not the tree. It's the story behind it. The people who loved it. The moments that matter." That night, we gathered around the fireplace, drinking cocoa and sharing stories. Daniel asked me about my childhood, about Linda, about the Christmases he had never really known. He laughed softly at my tales, sometimes shook his head in disbelief, but he listened with intent. The young man who once mocked what he didn't understand was gone, replaced by someone who respected and cherished it. And I realized then that the quiet revenge I had orchestrated had fully come to fruition. It had been delivered not through confrontation or shame, but through patience, reflection, and the subtle unveiling of truth. Sometimes, I think about how easy it would have been to yell at him, to demand respect, to show my anger. But anger never teaches. It only provokes, and it leaves wounds that take decades to heal. What I wanted was not to punish Daniel, but to guide him, to give him a mirror to see his own oversight and a chance to correct it. And he did. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began to carry the lessons forward. He preserved small traditions in his own home. He made sure Emily understood them. He even asked if I would come and help with his decorations the following year. I agreed, quietly proud of the transformation. It was a slow victory, one that required no speeches or harsh words. The lesson had unfolded naturally, quietly, like snow settling softly on a winter night. And in that quiet, I found a profound satisfaction. Christmas, I realized, is more than a date or a set of decorations. It's the endurance of memory. It's honoring what came before us. It's the patience to teach, the patience to wait, and the patience to let life reveal lessons in its own time. Daniel eventually told me he would never forget that Christmas. Not because of the gifts, the lights, or the fancy decorations, but because of the quiet moments, the stories, and the understanding he had gained. He said he felt a connection to the past he had ignored, a respect for traditions he had once mocked. And that, I thought, is the true meaning of revenge. Not vengeance, not anger, not making someone suffer. True revenge is teaching a lesson so quietly, so effectively, that the person realizes it themselves and carries it forward with gratitude and insight. I remember sitting alone one evening, weeks later, reflecting on it all.
The house was quiet.
The lights from the tree cast long shadows across the walls. I thought about Linda, about Daniel, about the years of laughter and misunderstanding. And I realized that patience, wisdom, and quiet action had accomplished what anger never could. Sometimes, I think of that crooked little ornament and smile. Not because I won in some competitive sense, but because a young man learned humility, memory, and respect on his own terms. Because a tradition that could have been mocked was instead honored. Because a life lesson was delivered quietly, with grace, and fully understood. And as I sip my evening tea and look at the tree, I whisper a simple truth I've carried through decades of life. Sometimes silence is the best revenge. Sometimes patience teaches what shouting never can. And sometimes, love, quiet, enduring love, is more powerful than any argument, any lecture, any punishment. Daniel and I never spoke much of that Christmas afterward. We didn't need to. The lesson had been learned, the understanding had been achieved, and a bond deeper than mere tradition had been restored. I've kept that wooden ornament on the mantel ever since. It isn't perfect. Its edges are still rough, its paint still faded. But every year when I see it, I remember the quiet victory, the subtle teaching, and the satisfaction of seeing someone you love finally understand what really matters.
And I am at peace.
Life has a way of teaching us what words cannot. And when you are patient, observant, and wise, you realize that the most meaningful victories are the ones that leave no bitterness, only understanding. So if you ever find yourself mocked, dismissed, or overlooked, remember this: true power lies in quiet patience, in intelligent action, and in letting someone discover their own lesson. Because the lesson they uncover themselves is the one they will carry forever. And that, my friends, is the essence of moral revenge.
Quiet, patient, thoughtful. Not cruel. Not loud.
Just, perfectly, gently earned. Sometimes, silence is the best revenge. And in that silence, you find more wisdom, more peace, and more satisfaction than any shout could ever deliver.